Sometimes a man thinks a compliment is just a nice sentence, a verbal touch, something thrown into the air to see if it works. But Machiavellian thinking doesn't see it that way. To him, a compliment is a tool of power, a silent mechanism that opens doors even persistence can't reach. And when it comes to a woman, a well-used compliment can melt even the most subtle resistance. Because it's not about the words themselves, it's about how you make her feel while saying them. You don't praise her beauty, you praise the way she exists. You don't flatter her body, you highlight the way she becomes unique in the world. A compliment isn't a description, it's an emotional suggestion. That's why Machiavellian compliments are never obvious, desperate, or common. They are precise, strategic, sharp. They make her think about you even when she doesn't want to. Remember you even when she tries to forget. Smile without wanting to admit why. Because the human mind feeds on selective attention. If you compliment what everyone compliments, you become just another man. But when you compliment what no one else notices, you become the man who truly sees her. That's why the first compliment that melts a woman has nothing to do with her looks. It touches a trait she hides or underestimates. Because every woman has a part of herself she believes no one notices. A strength, a vulnerability, a secret talent, an intimate contradiction. When you're the first to name it, she feels as if you've read her like an open book, and that awakens something dangerous, confidence mixed with intrigue. Suddenly, you're no longer just another man. You're the only one who understood her without her saying a single word. A second Machiavellian compliment is never direct. It's suggested. You don't say, "You're interesting." You say, "It's rare to meet someone who actually makes you think." You don't say, "You're beautiful." You say, "Why do you have that kind of aura that makes people look at you without even realizing it?" You give her a compliment that forces her to interpret, to decode you, to wonder what exactly you saw in her. And while she's trying to figure that out, her mind makes space for you. Every strategic compliment creates an internal question, and every internal question gives you power. When a woman thinks about you after a conversation, it's not because of what you said. It's because of what you left unsaid. Machiavellian thinking understands that the right silence is more seductive than full words. Then comes the compliment of contrast, the most dangerous one. It's saying something that mixes light and shadow at the same time. Something like, "You have a soft energy, but it feels like you could destroy someone if you wanted to." That kind of compliment touches a duality every woman has, the sweetness she shows and the strength she hides. When you acknowledge both, she feels her power and her tenderness at the same time. She feels whole, and every woman melts for the man who makes her feel complete. No one can resist being seen in all their dimensions. There's a Machiavellian compliment that works precisely because it doesn't sound like a compliment at all. It's when you observe her calmly and say, "I'm intrigued by the way you think before you speak." It doesn't sound romantic, it doesn't sound needy, it doesn't sound suggestive, yet it touches her deeply because it reveals attention. Subtle compliments melt more than obvious ones because they slip under the radar. They enter through the back door of the heart without triggering defenses. A woman can resist a direct flirt, but she cannot resist being silently understood. And whether people believe it or not, one of the most powerful compliments is the one that isn't about her, but about the effect she has on you. When you say, "With you, it's impossible to pretend I'm not enjoying this conversation," she doesn't receive a sentence. She receives an unintentional confession. She melts because she feels she changed your emotional state, that she had a real impact. Machiavellian thinking always understood that power isn't in what you say, but in what the other person feels while listening to you. And when a woman feels that she affects you, that she makes you react, that she moves something inside you, she begins to connect with you intensely, even if she never admits it. But the most subtle compliment of all is the one you give with your eyes. You don't need words, you need a pause. A look that lasts half a second longer than normal, paired with a calm expression, not an exaggerated smile. That silence is a compliment no conventional man knows how to give. It's the purest form of suggestion, the most intimate form of recognition, the hardest message to ignore. "I like who you are," without you having to try. Machiavelli wasn't searching for pretty phrases. He was searching for emotional influence. And he knew that when a compliment is perfectly calibrated, it doesn't just melt, it marks. A woman may forget a generic flirt, but she never forgets the man who saw something in her that no one else noticed. That's the essence of strategic seduction, not competing with others, but becoming irreplaceable. There is a type of compliment Machiavelli considered almost dangerous, not because it's offensive, but because it has the power to break through emotional defenses a woman doesn't even realize she built. It's the compliment that recognizes her emotional intelligence, the part of her no one notices because everyone is too busy looking at the obvious. When you say something like, "You have a very rare way of listening," like you actually want to understand, not just reply. She doesn't receive a normal compliment. She receives recognition for something she always felt the world ignored. A woman can live comfortably with her beauty, with her charm, with her physical presence. She already knows all of that. But recognizing her sensitivity, her patience, her intuition, her ability to read the room, that melts her, because it touches a part of herself she actively protects. Every time you describe an internal trait others overlook, you pull her one step closer to you. Machiavelli knew that human beings melt in the presence of someone who sees beyond the mask. And every woman wears one. The strong one who also feels fear. The confident one who sometimes doubts. The sweet one who knows how to be cold. The independent one who, from time to time, wants someone to take care of her. When you acknowledge that mix, when you say something like, "You have a calm presence, but it feels like there's a fire inside you not everyone could handle," she feels a deep recognition, almost dangerous, because it means you've seen her in the same way she only sees herself in moments of solitude. And when a man sees her that way, she inevitably begins to think about him differently. Another powerful Machiavellian compliment is the one that doesn't point to her past or her present, but to her potential. When you say, "It feels like you're meant for bigger things," even if you haven't fully accepted it yet, you're not talking about who she is, you're talking about who she could become. And that activates something powerful, the feeling that with you, she can expand. That you don't want her for what she shows, but for what she keeps hidden. Women melt for men who reveal futures, not just compliments. Because a future-focused compliment doesn't flatter, it inspires. It doesn't inflate her ego, it awakens her ambition, and that leaves a mark. Machiavellian thinking also understood that some compliments are more effective when they seem like accidents. When a phrase slips out like, "I like the way you look when you're focused," and your gaze shifts naturally, she doesn't register it as something planned. She feels it as real, spontaneous, and everything spontaneous melts more than anything rehearsed. A woman may distrust a compliment that sounds too perfect, but she never doubts an observation that seems to escape unintentionally. The accidental compliment is actually a strategy, saying what she didn't expect to hear at the moment she least expected it. Then there's the compliment that works on her pride, not her surface ego. The deeper pride built through years of effort, wounds, growth, and difficult decisions. When you say, "I admire how you keep your essence, even in environments where others lose themselves," she feels that you value her integrity, not her appearance. That's rare, and anything rare becomes valuable. A woman melts for the man who recognizes her character, not her emotional makeup. Because there's something no woman easily admits. Her true beauty lives in her story, not in her face. And when you compliment what she has been strong enough to carry, she looks at you as if you've uncovered a secret no one else knew how to read. A very subtle Machiavellian compliment is the one that makes her compare herself to others, without you ever saying it directly. When you casually say, "I don't know," with you, conversation just flows effortlessly. She doesn't hear a simple compliment about her personality. She hears an implicit comparison that places her above others without you having to mention anyone else. That kind of compliment is powerful because it creates a sense of exclusivity. You didn't tell her she's special, you made her feel special, and feeling is worth far more than hearing. There's another compliment that works because it appeals to her mystery. Women, even the most open ones, always keep a hidden part of themselves. And when you say, "There's something about you I can't fully figure out, and that's exactly why I'm drawn to you," she doesn't receive a compliment. She receives a challenge. Suddenly, you're not the man who has her fully figured out. You're the man who finds her intriguing. That melts her because it activates her desire to be discovered, but also to keep a little mystery. There's no woman who doesn't react to feeling mysterious in the eyes of a man who looks at her with both respect and curiosity. And finally, there's the most Machiavellian compliment of all, the one that doesn't elevate her, but confirms what she already suspects about herself. When you say, "You have an energy that changes the atmosphere without trying," she doesn't think you made it up. She knows it's true. She just needed to hear it. That kind of confirmation melts more than any romantic metaphor, because it shows her that you see her exactly as she feels she is, without decoration, without exaggeration. A good compliment doesn't create a new idea, it reinforces one she had hidden. It makes her feel powerful and, at the same time, connected to you. Machiavellian thinking understood that emotional influence isn't built with intensity, but with precision. Each of these compliments works because it touches a different string inside her: pride, mystery, vulnerability, potential, strength, intuition. And when a man manages to play several of those strings without sounding needy, without sounding fake, without sounding exaggerated, he becomes someone who stays in her mind long after the conversation ends. For Machiavellian thinking, the key was never just to compliment, but to do it in a way that made her feel exposed, in the best possible sense. And that only happens when a compliment touches something she doesn't fully control. For example, when you say, "I like how your voice changes when you talk about something you care about." You're pointing at an involuntary gesture, something she doesn't plan and can't hide. That kind of compliment melts her because it shows you see more than you should, that you notice details others miss, that you pay attention to signals she doesn't even realize she gives off. It's a compliment that opens invisible doors in her mind, because it doesn't praise what she tries to show, it praises what escapes her. And when a woman feels that a man sees her spontaneous essence, something inside her softens. There's another Machiavellian compliment that works almost like a spell: the compliment of intention. You don't talk about what she does, you talk about why you think she does it. When you say, "I get the feeling that when you make a decision, you had already decided long before, you were just waiting for the right moment," you're recognizing her internal strategy, her way of processing the world. She melts because she feels you're reading her at a level usually reserved only for her most private thoughts. It's the kind of compliment that makes her wonder how you noticed, and that question alone makes her start paying attention to you differently. You're no longer a stranger. You're someone who understands the emotional logic behind her actions. Machiavellian thinking understood that power lives in what the other person feels might be revealed if they let their guard down. That's why there's a compliment that points directly at her vulnerability. It's simple but powerful. The way you're strong isn't loud, but it's impossible not to notice. That kind of sentence melts her because it validates an internal struggle she never fully exposes. It recognizes a quiet effort that often goes unseen. It's not a compliment about beauty or attitude, it's about endurance. And every woman has moments where she had to be strong without anyone noticing. When you notice it, she feels something unexpected: relief. And that relief quickly turns into connection. There's another compliment that isn't used often, but one Machiavellian thinking would strongly defend: the compliment about her emotional effect on you, but not from weakness, from authenticity. You don't say, "I'm crazy about you," or "I can't live without you." That would give away power. You say something like, "It surprises me how easy it is to be around you, like my mind calms down a little." It doesn't sound obsessive. It doesn't sound desperate. It sounds real, and a woman melts at the idea that her energy has a positive effect on someone who doesn't seem easy to impress. That compliment makes her feel valuable, not just attractive, but emotionally meaningful. Without saying it directly, it tells her she brings something not everyone does, and that makes her feel irreplaceable. A very effective Machiavellian compliment is the one that recognizes her sense of humor, not the joke itself, but how she uses it. When you say, "Your laugh shows up exactly when the room needs it," you're saying she doesn't just laugh, she has emotional intuition, an instinct for balance. That melts her because it shows you see her social role, her ability to lighten situations without even trying. You're not calling her laugh cute, you're calling it a tool that changes the atmosphere. And that difference is subtle, but enormous. Machiavellian thinking also knew that some women respond deeply to compliments that touch their independence. But the trick is not saying, "You're independent." That sounds like a cheap cliche. The real compliment is something like, "I don't know if you realize it, but you have a presence that doesn't need permission." That kind of sentence melts her because it doesn't talk about what she does. It talks about what she projects. It places her as someone strong without needing to prove it. And strong women don't melt for men who weaken them, they melt for men who recognize their strength without feeling threatened by it. And strangely enough, one of the most irresistible compliments is the one that feels like a private observation. Something like, "It's interesting. When I listen to you talk, I feel like there's always something between the lines that makes me want to know more." That kind of compliment melts her because it suggests depth, mystery, an interest that goes beyond the obvious. It makes her feel complex, intriguing, endlessly interesting. And every woman loves to be seen as a universe, not a summary. Machiavellian thinking understood something very few people truly grasp. A compliment isn't meant to inflate her. It's meant to wake her up, to activate a dormant emotion, to touch a part of her no one has ever touched before. When a compliment makes a woman think, remember, question, or smile to herself, that compliment has already done its job. And each of these phrases doesn't just melt her, it marks territory in her mind. It makes her associate you with a different sensation, with a level of attention other men don't offer, with the idea that with you there is more depth, more play, more emotional tension. That's what turns a compliment into power. Machiavellian thinking understood that a well-crafted compliment doesn't work because of the sentence itself, but because of what it provokes inside the other person. And with a woman, the most powerful thing you can provoke is that mix of surprise and recognition, that feeling of, I didn't expect you to notice that, but it's true. That's why there's a compliment that touches a very deep nerve. The compliment of her calm, not her external calm, but the calm she creates around her. When you say, there's something about your presence that makes everything feel less chaotic, she doesn't hear a superficial praise. She hears that you perceive the invisible effect she has on others, and that melts her because it confirms a power she feels herself but never says out loud. Not everyone has the ability to bring serenity without speaking. Not everyone carries an energy that organizes the space. When you recognize that, she feels instant intimacy, as if you saw her without filters. Another Machiavellian compliment works through the way she observes. You don't say, you have beautiful eyes. Everyone says that. You say, your eyes don't just look, they analyze. That kind of compliment melts her because it's not aesthetic, it's psychological. It speaks to the depth behind her gaze, her way of understanding people, her perceptive intelligence. And a woman always melts when a man notices what goes beyond surface beauty. The compliment of a thinking gaze is one of the most effective because it tells her she doesn't go unnoticed, that her way of seeing the world is unique, and that you value her not only for what she shows, but for what she intuits. There is a Machiavellian compliment that feels almost forbidden, not because it's sexual, but because it reveals too much of her emotional essence. It's when you say, you have a very unique way of being delicate without ever losing your strength. That melts her because it speaks to the most intimate contradiction inside every woman, the duality between her inner strength and her natural softness. Many women feel they have to be one or the other. When you compliment the coexistence of both, she feels understood on a deeper level, one that doesn't need explanations. It's a compliment that embraces her full complexity. Machiavellian thinking also understood that some compliments work because they awaken curiosity. You don't say, I find you interesting. That's weak. You say, there's something in the way you speak that makes it feel like you don't say everything you think. That compliment is a precise weapon. It turns her into an open mystery, a layered enigma, an emotional labyrinth worth exploring. She melts because it makes her feel unreadable, sophisticated, difficult to fully decipher. And no woman can resist feeling like a seductive unknown. One of the compliments that melts the most, and one Machiavellian thinking would definitely use, is the compliment of self-control. You don't talk about her restraint as if it was something boring. You frame it as an admirable inner discipline. You say, I'm impressed by how carefully you choose your words, like you already know the impact they'll have. She doesn't hear a casual compliment, she hears an emotional X-ray. She knows not everyone notices that level of control, that ability to regulate emotions, to modulate intensity, to shape the emotional climate of a space. And when she feels that you've seen it, something inside her softens. There's also the compliment that points directly at her creative mind. It doesn't matter if she draws, writes, works, organizes, or simply imagines. You say, you have a quiet kind of creativity that shows up even in the smallest details. Women often hide their creativity because they believe it isn't extraordinary enough to show. When a man recognizes it, even in her everyday gestures, she feels a deeply emotional validation. You're not praising something obvious like her beauty or her smile. You're praising something intimate, almost secret. Another Machiavellian compliment touches her social intuition. You don't say, you're social. You say, you read the room in a way most people don't. She melts because for most women, that's true. They perceive silences, tensions, subtleties, energies, things others completely miss. And when a man recognizes that, she feels an immediate sense of complicity, as if you two know how to read between the lines. That feeling of, he sees what I see too, creates a dangerous connection, a psychological alliance. Machiavellian thinking also understood that a compliment can be powerful even when it sounds contradictory. When you say, "You have a calm way of making an impact," you're complimenting her without exaggeration, without being obvious, without sounding sweet or needy. You're telling her she influences, that she leaves a mark, that she carries weight, but does it quietly. That balance between strength and softness is something many women strive for, but very few men actually notice. That kind of compliment makes her feel special without making her feel exposed. And finally, one of the most devastating compliments of all, the one that validates her authenticity. You don't say, "You're different." That sounds generic. You say, "You don't try to impress," and yet you do. That compliment melts her because it touches the root of her essence. It tells her that what makes her attractive isn't her effort, but her nature. It makes her feel enough, valuable, genuine. No woman can resist feeling admired for who she is when she isn't trying to be anything more. Machiavellian thinking knew these compliments aren't pretty phrases. They're keys. Keys that open parts of her you thought were closed. Keys that lower her guard. Keys that make her think about you. Keys that make her feel a mix of safety, intrigue, and emotional desire. Because when a man knows how to compliment like this, he doesn't conquer through intensity, he conquers through emotional precision. Many men believe a compliment has to be big, elaborate, almost poetic. But Machiavellian thinking understood that doesn't work on a woman who's used to hearing the same words from every mouth. The compliments that truly melt her are the ones that touch an emotional place she rarely allows anyone to reach. That's why there's a final compliment, one that blends all the previous techniques into a single idea, the compliment of silent impact. When you say, "It's interesting how your presence changes my mood without you having to do anything," that melts her completely. Because it doesn't talk about beauty or charm or attitude, it talks about influence. It tells her she has an involuntary power over you, one she didn't seek, one that simply exists. And every woman melts at the idea that she can influence without effort, that her essence carries weight, that her existence alone creates an effect. But there's another Machiavellian compliment that works because it breaks expectations. When you say, "I like the way you think," even when you stay quiet, she doesn't hear something common. She hears something no one has ever told her before. That compliment melts her because it reveals that even her silence is attractive to you. And that makes her feel seen on a level that doesn't depend on her words, her mood, or her behavior. She feels appreciated in her purest state, when she isn't trying to be anything at all. That compliment communicates something extremely powerful. You don't even have to try to get my attention. And no woman can resist the idea of being desired without effort. Machiavellian thinking would also use a compliment that touches her self-discipline. Something like, "You have an inner strength that doesn't need to show off, and that's what I respect the most." That kind of sentence melts her because it recognizes something she built herself, through effort, wounds, and difficult choices. It doesn't flatter something superficial, it flatters her story, the invisible battles she had to fight alone. When a man recognizes that kind of strength, she feels a mix of pride and vulnerability that opens a deep door to trust. There's a compliment very few men use because it requires seeing beyond the obvious, the compliment of her patience. When you say, "The way you wait shows you know your own worth," she receives a silent recognition of her emotional self-control. Women are patient in ways no one notices. They wait, they observe, they analyze, they endure. When you recognize that patience as a sign of self-value, she melts because she feels understood from the inside, not from the surface. But one of the most powerful compliments of all is the one that touches her intuition. You don't say, "You're intelligent," that's shallow. You say, "You have an intuition that makes it impossible to lie to you." She melts because she feels her emotional sensitivity is not only noticed but valued as a higher form of intelligence. Female intuition is rarely acknowledged openly, but when you compliment it, you turn it into a talent, an admirable ability. And that creates an immediate connection because it validates something very deep within her. Machiavellian thinking would also use a compliment based on reciprocity, not dependence. Something like, "With you, conversation doesn't feel like effort, it feels natural." That compliment melts her because it doesn't put her on a pedestal, but it doesn't diminish you either. It's balanced, adult, calm. It tells her that with you there is emotional flow, a harmony that isn't forced, and every woman melts at the idea of a connection that doesn't feel heavy, that simply happens. Another Machiavellian compliment touches the way she protects others. It's not obvious, but it's emotionally devastating. You say, "You have a way of caring for people that shows even when you try to hide it." That compliment touches her most human side, her warmest side, the one that is often used against her. She melts because she feels you don't just see her strength and her mystery, but also her tenderness. And very few things melt a woman more than feeling seen in her entirety. And then there's the compliment that makes her feel unique without comparing her to anyone else. You say, "I've never met someone with your exact mix of calm and fire." It's a precise, intimate compliment, not exaggerated, not artificial. She melts because she feels you've noticed a combination that's rarely acknowledged, her serenity and her passion existing at the same time. Without saying it directly, you tell her she's irreplaceable. And finally, Machiavellian thinking would use the compliment that closes the circle, the one that turns perception into destiny. There's something about you that makes everything you touch carry meaning. That compliment melts her because it suggests she doesn't just have value, she transforms. It implies her essence has real impact, that she leaves a mark, that nothing about her is superficial. And when a woman hears that, when she feels her existence carries emotional weight, something inside her shifts. She begins to see you as someone who understands her not for what she shows, but for what she radiates. Used correctly, these compliments don't conquer through intensity, they conquer through precision. They don't aim to flatter, they aim to reveal. They don't artificially elevate her, they touch truths she's kept hidden. Machiavellian thinking understood that a well-used compliment doesn't just melt, it binds. It binds through understanding, through emotional reading, through the feeling that you see more than you say. Because in the end, real power isn't in the compliment itself, it's in what she feels every time she remembers the man who said it.